welcome you. Today, we're diving deep into the life of Thomas Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
And not just, the face on the monument. We're talking about the complex human being.
Right.
I mean, think about it. The main writer of the Declaration of Independence, third president, a diplomat, architect, philosopher.
A lot of hats. A truly multifaceted individual. And, well, as we explore his journey, you just can't ignore that central tension, can you?
That paradox.
That huge contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Here's this champion of liberty who, well, throughout his whole life, enslaved over 600 people.
It's staggering.
And then there's the complexity of his personal life, like the relationship with Sally Hemings. We have to acknowledge that, too.
Exactly. So our goal here isn't to simplify him, definitely not to sanitize his story. It's more about trying to understand the whole person.
Right, the full picture.
From his early years, those formative experiences, right up to his legacy, which is still so debated today. We'll look at his role in the Revolution, his rise in early American politics, his time as president.
Mm-hmm.
We're using a pretty detailed research outline to really unpack all of this.
Good.
So let's start right at the beginning. His early life, education. Those things that really set the stage for everything else.
Yeah, and it's striking how much his background really shaped his whole worldview, including, like you said, those deep contradictions.
It seems like right from the start, his life was just woven into the fabric of slavery, even as he wrote about liberty.
Absolutely. He was born, 1743, Shadwell Plantation, Albemarle County, Virginia.
Yeah.
And this was a society where, land and enslaved labor were just the bedrock.
The foundation of everything.
Pretty much. So right from those earliest years, his own wealth, his privilege, it's all tied up with the very system he'd later critique, at least on paper. That contradiction is key to understanding everything we're talking about today.
His father, Peter Jefferson, he sounds like quite a figure. A planter, surveyor, mapped the frontier, militia captain, House of Burgesses.
Yeah, a real presence, known for being strong, ambitious. And then his mother, Jane Randolph Jefferson, she came from one of those really distinguished Virginia families.
Right, the Tidewater elite connection.
Exactly. So you've got this mixed sort of frontier tribe on one side and established gentry connections on the other.
That blend is interesting, and you can sort of see how that might shape someone, maybe giving him that self-reliance, but also a sense of, entitlement almost.
It's very possible. And then, bam, age 14, his father dies. That's huge.
Massive turning point.
He inherits about 5,000 acres, including the land that would become Monticello, and dozens of enslaved people.
Just like that, at 14.
Mm-hmm. And the entanglement just gets deeper later on, right?
Yeah.
1774, his father-in-law, John Wales, dies.
Ah, yes. That brings in another huge amount of land. Oh, was it 11,000 acres?
Yeah, and 135 more enslaved people, including Sally Hemings and her family.
And significant debt, too. That's often missed. It wasn't just wealth.
That's a really crucial point. These inheritances, they funded his education, his politics, Monticello, but the foundation was forced labor.
It's the paradox right there at the core.
You can't escape it.
So his early environment, Shadwell, then Tuckahoe. Shadwell was on the frontier, but it sounds like it wasn't exactly roughing it.
No, described as a well-appointed gentry house.
Yeah.
Culture, books, music. Peter Jefferson being involved in westward expansion, that probably rubbed off too, right? That looking outward.
Seems likely. That expansionist drive definitely shows up later.
Yeah. Interestingly, while he clearly admired his father, his relationship with his mother, it seems maybe a bit more distant. There isn't much correspondence.
And losing his father so young, at 14, he said he had to take care of himself entirely.
Must have bred incredible self-reliance. But maybe also that need for mentors he found later, like Wythe.
Yeah. And that earliest memory he recorded, being carried on a pillow by an enslaved man.
Chilling, isn't it?
It just shows how utterly normal, how present slavery was from his very first moments.
It speaks volumes. So, okay, education. Started young, age 5, then boarding school from age 9 with Reverend William Douglas. Latin, Greek, French. Though Jefferson apparently thought it was a bit lightweight later.
Called him superficial, right? High standards.
Apparently. But then Reverend James Morey, 1758 to 60. That sounds much more serious. Strong classical education, history, science.
Yeah, you can see the seeds of his interests there. Natural history, maybe even the West, because Morey was interested in that too.
Could be. And that's where he became close friends with Dabney Carr.
Right. And alongside the academics, he's developing these other passions: violin, writing, gardening, architecture.
They weren't just hobbies, were they? They were part of who he was, his engagement with the world. Then 1760, off to William and Mary.
And that seems like another huge turning point, mainly because of Dr. William Small.
Absolutely pivotal. Professor of math, natural philosophy, brought the Enlightenment right to Jefferson.
Jefferson said Small gave him his first views of the expansion of science and of the system of things. Life-changing stuff.
Yeah, it really opened his mind. And Small introduced him around Williamsburg society too. George Wythe, governor for Coquille.
Key connections.
And that led directly to studying law under Wythe from 1762 to 67. Not just reading law books, but really being mentored.
Right. Wythe taught him government theory, history, philosophy. Jefferson called him a second father.
That deep grounding in enlightenment, ideas, rights, governance. You can see how it directly shaped his revolutionary thinking.
Absolutely. He got admitted to the bar in 67, practiced for a while, mostly land cases, then shifted focus more towards politics and running his plantations.
So yeah, you see all these threads coming together: family, slavery, the frontier spirit, the elite connections, and this incredibly rigorous Enlightenment education. It all molds this, deeply complex figure heading into the revolution.
And it's amazing how quickly he became such a key voice for colonial rights, really leveraging his intellect and especially his writing.
Yeah, getting elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1768, seated in 69, that's the real start of his political career.
And he jumps right in, signing those non-importation agreements against British taxes.
Standard colonial protest tactics then, boycotts. And by 73, he's pushing for those intercolonial committees of correspondence.
Which were crucial for getting the colonies talking to each other, coordinating.
Vital. But the real game changer was publishing a summary view of the rights of British America in 1774.
Right. That started as instructions for Virginia's delegates, but it became so much more.
Oh, yeah. He basically argued Parliament had zero authority over the colonies. None. Only connection was through the king.
That was radical for 74.
Extremely radical. And he listed all these grievances against King George, calling them usurpations.
And the Virginia Convention thought it was too much.
A bit too strong for them at that moment, yeah. But his friends published it anyway, and it spread like wildfire.
So that pamphlet really put him on the map as a leading thinker for the cause.
Absolutely. Established his reputation. And you see the core arguments of the Declaration right there. Natural rights, the list of wrongs.
It really laid the foundation, showcased his ability to just articulate these big ideas so clearly, so powerfully.
So when he gets elected to the Second Continental Congress in 75, he arrives with this major reputation, even though he's still relatively young.
And he helps draft that Declaration of the Causes and Necessity for taking up arms that summer.
Yeah, involved early on. But obviously, 1776 is the big one. Richard Henry Lee makes the motion for independence in June.
June 7th.
The spark.
And then they form that committee to draft the actual declaration. Jefferson, Adams, Franklin.
Sherman, Livingston, the Committee of Five.
And Jefferson gets the job of writing the first draft.
Why him specifically?
Well, his writing skills were known, obviously. Plus, having a Virginian take the lead was politically smart. Virginia was huge, influential.
Makes sense. So he holds up in Philly and drafts it between June 11th and 28th.
Drawing on everything he'd learned, right? Locke, life, liberty, property. Though Jefferson tweaks it to pursuit of happiness, that famous phrase. And Algernon Sidney, other Enlightenment thinkers. George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, too.
Yeah, and in his own summary view. His goal wasn't necessarily total originality, but...
to express the American mind, right?
Exactly. Put the common sense of the matter into plain words people could get behind. Adams and Franklin made a few tweaks, then off to Congress it went.
And Congress wasn't just rubber stamping it. They debated it heavily, July 2nd to 4th.
Oh yeah, they changed quite a bit. Maybe a quarter of the text got altered or cut.
The biggest cut being that whole section condemning the slave trade.
That was the one Jefferson felt most strongly about. He called the slave trade a cruel war against human nature itself. Really powerful language.
But it got taken out. Why?
Politics. South Carolina and Georgia insisted. They wanted to keep importing enslaved people. And some northern delegates, whose economies were tied into the trade too, they went along with it.
A major foundational compromise right there.
Absolutely. A stark example. They softened some other language too, maybe trying not to alienate the British people themselves too much.
Jefferson wasn't happy about the changes, especially the slavery part.
No. He circulated his original draft later to show what he'd intended. But still, the core document, that incredible preamble about natural rights, the right to revolution, that's still fundamentally Jefferson.
And adopted July 4th, 1776.
A watershed moment. Then they rushed to print it. The Dunlap broadsides get the word out. The formal signing on parchment came later, starting in August.
And the significance, I mean, it's the cornerstone, isn't it?
Absolutely. The philosophical justification for the whole thing. Universal rights, government by consent.
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Enduring words. Influenced freedom movements everywhere. Lincoln saw it as the nation's moral compass.
But that drafting process, the compromises, it really shows that tension from the start. Ideals versus political reality.
Precisely. Silencing slavery for the sake of unity. It embedded that contradiction deep in the nation's founding. The same contradiction Jefferson himself lived.
So after the Declaration, he doesn't stay in Congress long term.
No, he heads back to Virginia, serves in the House of Delegates from 76 to 79, really focused on reshaping Virginia's laws along Republican lines.
He was involved in some major reform efforts there, wasn't he? Criminal law, trying to set up public education.
Yeah, that bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge, huge ambition, though it didn't pass then, showed his belief in an educated citizenry for a republic.
And the bill for establishing religious freedom, that was huge.
Landmark achievement. Though it took until 1786 to pass, largely thanks to Madison pushing it through. Separation of church and state in Virginia, a major precedent.
Then he becomes governor in 79, succeeding Patrick Henry.
Right. But his governorship, 79 to 81, was just dominated by the war, British invasions, constant crisis.
And the state constitution didn't give the governor much power, right?
Very weak executive. Had to consult the Council of State constantly. Made decisive action difficult. He struggled to raise troops, get supplies.
And he got a lot of criticism for how he handled the British raids in 81. Accused of being slow, fleeing Richmond.
Yeah, Tarleton's raid on Charlottesville forcing him to flee Monticello. It led to accusations, even an official inquiry.
He was cleared, though.
Yes, the charges were repudiated. But that experience governing during wartime with limited power and facing harsh public criticism, it must have really affected him.
You think it made him more sensitive later on? Or maybe more determined to use executive power when he had it?
Probably a bit of both. Despite the troubles, he did oversee moving the capital to Richmond, set up some state departments.
So after that rough patch as governor, a brief return to Congress, then off to Europe as a diplomat.
Right. Joined Franklin and Adams in Paris in 84 to negotiate trade treaties. Then succeeded Franklin as minister to France in 85. Stayed till late 89.
What were his main goals there?
Primarily promoting American trade tobacco, whale oil, trying to get good deals, had some modest success, treaties with Prussia, Morocco.
And dealing with the Barbary pirates.
He saw the threat, advocated for using force, but the U.S. just didn't have the naval power then.
But it wasn't all work, right? France must have been an amazing experience for him intellectually, culturally.
Hugely enriching. Architecture, art, science, French society. He soaked it all up, sent tons of stuff back to the Monticello books, seeds, drawings.
And he's there for the start of the French Revolution.
Watched it unfold with intense interest, a lot of sympathy initially. Saw it as linked to the American Revolution, advised Lafayette.
But maybe seeing France's turmoil and America's weakness abroad reinforced his push for westward expansion later, for national strength.
Very likely. It highlighted America's vulnerabilities.
Then he comes back and Washington makes him the first Secretary of State, 1790.
Straight into the heart of the new government. And straight into conflict with Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury.
The famous rivalry, based on totally different visions for the country.
Absolutely, Jefferson. Agrarian republic, states' rights, limited federal government, strict interpretation of the Constitution, pro-France.
Hamilton, strong central government, manufacturing, commerce, loose interpretation, closer ties to Britain, polar opposites.
Jefferson fiercely opposed Hamilton's financial plan, federal government, assuming state debts, creating a national bank.
He thought it was unconstitutional, benefited elites. trampled on states' rights.
All of the above.
Oh.
And they clashed constantly over foreign policy, too, especially how to navigate between France and Britain. Washington tried to steer a neutral course.
And these fights basically led to the first political parties.
Pretty much. Federalists around Hamilton, Democratic Republicans coalescing around Jefferson and Madison. When Jefferson resigned in '93, he was really the established leader of the opposition.
Which leads to the 1796 election, Adams versus Jefferson.
Adams wins the presidency, but because of that weird electoral system back then, Jefferson, the runner-up, becomes vice president.
Talk about awkward. Serving under your main political rival.
Yeah, a very tense situation. He did his duty, presiding over the Senate, even wrote that manual of parliamentary practice still used today.
But his real role was leading the opposition from inside the administration.
Essentially, yes. He actively encouraged resistance to Adams' policies, especially the Alien and Sedition Acts in '98.
Those were hugely controversial, seen as trying to silence dissent, target immigrants who leaned Republican.
Exactly. And Jefferson's response was, well, pretty dramatic. He secretly wrote the Kentucky resolutions. Madison wrote similar ones for Virginia.
Arguing that states could nullify federal laws they thought were unconstitutional?
That was the core idea, the compact theory federal government created by states, so states are the ultimate judges of its power. That idea of nullification would have huge long-term consequences, obviously, leading right up to the Civil War.
A really radical assertion of states' rights, and that sets the stage for his own run for president in 1800.
The Revolution of 1800, as he called it.
A real showdown against Adams again, and it ends in that tie. Not between Adams and Jefferson, but Jefferson and his own running mate, Aaron Burr.
Yeah, 73 electoral votes each. Threw the whole thing into the House of Representatives. Took 36 ballots, lots of political drama, before Jefferson finally won.
Why did he call it a revolution?
He saw it as a peaceful transfer of power between parties with fundamentally different principles. Proved the constitutional system could work, even under pressure. His inaugural address tried to smooth things over. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists.
Trying to unify the country after a bitter election.
Exactly. Emphasizing majority rule, but protecting minority rights.
So, his presidency. What were the guiding principles for his domestic policy?
Wise and frugal government. That was the mantra. Reduce the federal government's influence, cut spending. He worked closely with Albert Gallatin at the Treasury.
They managed to cut taxes, like the whiskey tax?
Yep, repealed unpopular internal taxes. And they significantly cut the national debt from $83 million down to $57 million, even with the Louisiana Purchase costs.
How'd they manage that?
Primarily by cutting government spending, especially the military. Scaled back the Army and Navy, relied more on militias. Though, ironically, the First Barbary War forced him to build up the Navy a bit again. And he did sign the act creating West Point in 1802. So, some contradictions there too.
Practicality bumping up against ideology.
Happens a lot. They also let the Alien and Sedition Acts expire or repealed them, pardoned people jailed under the Sedition Act, made it easier for immigrants to become citizens again.
Undoing some of the Federalist policies.
Right. And then there was the clash with the judiciary, which was still packed with Federalists.
Adams's midnight judges.
Exactly. The Republican Congress repealed the Judiciary Act of 1801 that created those jobs. That led straight to Marbury v. Madison.
The landmark case, what was the upshot of that?
Chief Justice Marshall cleverly established the principle of judicial review, the Supreme Court's power to declare laws unconstitutional while actually denying the specific Federalist appointee his commission. A huge moment for the court's power.
So the courts asserted their authority. They also tried impeaching some Federalist judges.
Yeah, Judge Pickering was removed, but Justice Samuel Chase was acquitted.
Right.
Kind of tested the limits of using impeachment for political purposes.
What else domestically? Westward settlement.
Encouraged it with favorable land policies. And significantly, he signed the act banning the importation of slaves in 1807, taking effect in 1808.
Banning the international trade, not slavery itself.
Correct. A complex legacy there, too. So he tried to implement his limited government vision, but reality often forced compromises.
But the biggest event, undeniably, was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803.
Oh, absolutely monumental. Changed the map, changed the country's future.
What was the background there? Spain had given Louisiana back to France?
Secretly, yes, in 1800. Napoleon got it back.
Yeah.
And Jefferson was alarmed. French control of New Orleans and the Mississippi. That was a major threat to American trade expansion.
Especially for farmers in the West needing the river.
Exactly. Then, in 1802, Spain, still administering the territory, closed New Orleans to American shipping. That caused uproar, calls for war.
So Jefferson sends Monroe to Paris to try and buy just New Orleans.
Yeah, join Livingston there. Their instructions were to buy New Orleans, maybe the Floridas, budget up to $10 million.
But Napoleon surprised them.
Big time. He was facing war with Britain again. His plans for a Caribbean empire were failing partly due to the Haitian Revolution. So he offered to sell the entire Louisiana territory. All of it.
Wow. How much land are we talking?
About 828,000 square miles.
Yeah.
Double the size of the U.S. overnight. Monroe and Livingston jumped on it, agreed to $15 million, way beyond their instructions.
And this created a problem for Jefferson, didn't it? The strict constructionist.
Huge constitutional dilemma for him. The Constitution didn't say anything about the president being able to buy foreign territory like this.
So how did he justify it?
He wrestled with it, considered proposing a constitutional amendment, but worried Napoleon might change his mind. Ultimately, he argued it was essential for national security, for the country's future, maybe implied inherent executive power, or just that the good of the nation demanded it.
Pragmatism won out over strict principle again.
It did, and the impact was just immense. Secured the Mississippi, opened up that vast western territory, profoundly shaped America's destiny.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we keep coming back to that complexity, don't we? That paradoxical nature of Jefferson.
Absolutely. He was foundational in articulating American ideals, liberty, equality, self-government. His words still inspire.
Yet he was deeply entwined with slavery his entire life, and his actions as president, like the Louisiana Purchase, dramatically expanded the nation.
It forces you to ask some really tough questions. How do we balance monumental achievements against profound moral failings in historical figures?
Right. And what does Jefferson's life tell us about America's own founding ideals and those contradictions baked in from the start?
These aren't easy questions, and they're still relevant today. If you want to dig deeper, looking at primary sources, reading different biographies, you can really add more layers to understanding this pivotal, complicated figure.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's certainly a story that gives you a lot to think about, challenging how we see the past and how it connects to right now.